Have you ever had a bad day and just not been able to let it go? This episode is just for you. It's all about coping skills, what they are, and how to use them. Let's dive in. So, our intention for you today is that you learn about coping skills, what they are, and how you can start incorporating some into your life. And if you've never explored coping skills, you're not alone. Most of us don't learn about this stuff. Kat, you were the one who introduced me to coping skills a long time ago. So, what's been your experience with this? Like, how did you come across it?
Yeah, so like all good podcast episodes, I like to start out by saying I learned this in therapy. But it's crazy. One of my very first therapy sessions with the therapist I got when I moved here to Michigan, where I currently live. And I remember going to her and talking to her and just sort of, getting the basics down in that first session. And she told me that I needed to learn how to self-soothe. And always had anxiety, and I have all these different ways that I cope with it and get through day-to-day life. But until she pointed out that I actually did not know how to self-soothe, I didn't realize it was a skill that you could actually learn. And this comes from like childhood, right? It comes from, your parents soothe you, your parents, try to make sure you're okay. As you grow up, as you mature, as you move out the house, you have to become that for yourself. But so many of us aren't really taught that specifically. We have no idea how to calm ourselves down when we need it.
Okay. So, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, thank you for being so open with that. I know it's
Sure.
always, these things can be triggering when you start having to go back to like earlier therapy
Yeah.
sessions. And it's like, you're
Years
always like kind of
ago.
like gently pulling the ribbon off, going, is this going to stay closed?
Yeah.
We've handled this. So, thank you for that. I've, when you say self soothe, and part of it's my terribly bad dad joke brain, but the other part of it kind of comes in mind as like putting a soother in your mouth, and like
Yeah.
and you were saying that that's what our parents do and whatnot, and the thing that kind of, and it's wrong for me to have this connection because I do have several coping skills, but it's just like putting that soother in your mouth, and
Yeah.
it feels like a babyish thing almost. And I know it's not, but that's kind of, I was surprised that that just kind of popped up for me as we started talking about it. It's like, isn't that, it's not for babies. It's not a childish thing. I think it's just somewhere along the line, we kind of lose that.
I think it's like so many things. And the more that we do this work, the more that we try to become our best selves in 5 years, which is the point of 5 year you, the
Yes.
more we realize that the things that children need are all of our innate needs as a human being. Children just know how to ask for it. They know how to cry for it. They know how to demand attention. They know how to, come up and squeeze you and all these different things. As adults, we still need the things that we needed as children. We need love. We need connection. We need nourishment in order to have a fulfilling life. And as we get older, most people kind of go through these phases of soothing themselves. And if soothing to the people listening does sound a little childish, that's why we're calling this coping skills. You have coping skills that you don't realize that you have.
Right.
There are people listening that are already coming home from work, watching TV and cracking a beer. And we're not
Yes.
saying there's anything specifically wrong with that. What we're saying is if you're listening to this wanting to improve your life and you still feel like you aren't getting better, like you still feel anxious, like you still feel depressed, then maybe your default coping skills could use an upgrade.
I think that's a really good point. I think sometimes our default coping skill, and this probably goes back to a lot of, I've been talking to a lot of people, and especially you, about like childhood and how that forms things. But I think part of our coping skills is to avoid them. Like
Yes.
avoidance is like this huge coping skill. It's not really a coping skill in my mindset, but it's, I think, one that most of us have. You have a rough day at work, you come home, you crack a beer, you watch sports or whatever, and all that does is like it just kind of phases you out, and you stop having to deal with the reality that you're living in. But the problem with that, in that instance where you aren't dealing with it, you get stuck in a Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day was a movie, Catherine, just so you know, the day repeats over and over again. And when that happens and you're repeating it, so then the next day, next time you have a bad day, because like, let's face it, dates are hard, you know.
Yeah.
It's hard to human, as we like to
It
say.
is. Indeed.
And so you get home again and you sit down, you know, you turn on the game or a movie or Netflix or video games, crack a beer, and you do the same thing. And again, you've avoided it. Well, if you do that for a few weeks, that just starts to become your way of
That's
coping.
your thing.
And but the thing that's not happening is you're not actually managing it. You're just stuffing it more inside of you, and it's not handling it. So, like, what are some of the coping skills you've managed to? Which coping skills have you tried that have worked for you, and some that haven't? Because it's not like there's a one coping skill fits all thing.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think that one of the best coping skills that I have is talking to people and human connection. I have a tendency, I'm hyper independent, almost to a fault, where I feel like, I can read anything and figure it out. I can watch anything and figure it out. If there's a tough problem I'm dealing with, I'm sure there's a book on it. So when things get hard, I can tend to turn inwards. And so one of the ways that I cope, and one of the ways that my therapist recommended to me, is to tell somebody what you're going through. Because I'm definitely someone that's like, I'm fine, everything's great. But if you have one or two trusted people, and you've been a trusted person for me for many, many years, if you have a safe person, then you're winning. And you just have to be willing to allow someone to know that you're not okay in order to get that support and connection.
And that kind of ties back to our art of vulnerability episode too, because it is a challenge. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for, letting me be your coping skills buddy. So I'm going through Target and I'm trying to find the coping skill aisle. And I noticed it's kind of like a spice rack. So let's just do a few ideas, like some rapid fire things for our listeners to kind of go like, okay, that's something I can do. One for me, again, like you, I get stuck in my head on this. It's a beautiful hamster wheel, but it's definitely a hamster wheel going round and round and getting nowhere. So again, for me, talking is one of them. Another one for me is going for a walk outside.
Yeah.
That helps a lot. It just kind of gets you out of your location, get some fresh air, sun on your face, all the things. What's another one for you? Or one that you've tried?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say reading, because I love to read, but that could also be a little bit of escapism as well. As far as things that don't work, like I'm not going to be somebody that's like, I'm just going to cook and relaxing. Like I'm definitely a hobbyist failure. Like I have a really hard time having hobbies, because every hobby I have, I just want to turn into a business of some kind. So those types of things aren't great for me, because it just keeps my mind running of like, what else can I do with this? But I do this with my kids too. My daughter especially benefits from coping skills. Hers are drawing. She loves to draw. She's loved art since she was a kid. She has her cozy space. She has a cozy space with a beanbag in her room that has her stuffed animals and all kinds of things. That is more beneficial than them playing a video game together. I have boy-girl twins. For those who are just tuning in, they're 10 years old. And that's another reason why I brought up this topic for the podcast, because I've been talking to them about, they've had a lot of questions about drugs and alcohol lately. And the way
fun.
that great times parenting, piece of cake. I have explained drugs and alcohol as a coping skill that some people use in order to stop feeling their pain and their emotions. And that they use it to cope, but much like you were saying with the TV. But when they stop or they come off of, or the next day after drugs and alcohol, they still have the sad feelings with them.
Right.
And so I've explained to the kids that they have to choose better coping skills. For a lot of people, that's running, meditation, yoga, again, talking to a friend, planning a trip, writing, journaling. A lot of people, they like cooking, being creative, painting, doing anything that it's something for you, something that you enjoy, something that you do purely for the joy of it. Breathing, you've taken a whole course just on different types of
Breath work.
breath
Oh yeah.
work.
It's amazing what you can do with that stuff.
You can really calm down anxiety with specific types of breath work. Learning, again, rerouting thoughts, thinking, stopping repetitive thoughts, choosing new thoughts. There are countless different ways. One size does not fit all. But like I said, even children, you can identify this and say, I see you're getting upset. And that's what I do with my kids. Do you need to go sit in your chill space for a little while? Come back down when you've chilled out in the chill space. It
Yeah.
works. If they get mad or they start, bickering with each other or something, I'm like, does anyone need to do a coping skill right now? Do you need to go draw? Do you need some time to yourself? Because this energy, it's not working for anyone. You're disrupting my peace. So these are words and phrases you can use as a parent as well.
That's great. A few others that I do:
Yeah.
singing, humming. Those kind of soothe your nervous system. I'll go have, and this is really recent, but I'll go have like a hot shower and then a cold shower at the end, and that kind of resets your nervous system. And I found that to be like, it really helps, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. You mentioned running; that was one of my big ones.
And you meditate every morning.
I meditate every morning. Tapping. Did I just say? I can't remember if I just said
No,
that.
you didn't say tapping. Tapping is a really interesting technique. If you've never heard of it, it's where you tap pressure points on your body.
You tap acupressure meridians, and like there's a great app, the tapping. I think it's just called the tapping app.
The tapping solution, I think.
The tapping solution, right? Tapping up might be a completely different thing. Don't go to that one. But it's so useful. If you've never tried it, there's videos on YouTube for it. It was really one of those things that kind of shifted my energy along, because a coping skill for me is like that energy kind of builds up and it needs to keep moving along.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, when I get on the hamster wheel and it's like, oh, they did this and this and this, and you stew on it really more than anything. And that forces me to start finding ways that energy gets releases. I know for me, it used to be like, I would go and I would just shoot hockey pucks because it was just something. It got me out of the situation, got me into like a happy place, and did that. Playing, I have several guitars and I love to play those. So that's another one that I really, really will gravitate to when I have a hard moment. I say that, and I haven't done that in the last 6 months because I'm still trying different things. And sometimes the thing that worked Monday doesn't work Tuesday, and that's okay. That's why you try different things. What we're saying here is what I think the essence of our show is: 5 years from now, I'm assuming you want to be a healthier, happier, better adjusted version of yourself, listener. And when you think about that, that means that person has to try on new shirts this week. They have to try on new coping skills, and you don't have to get it right. You're not going to get it right. Just accept that, but you're going to try something new, and you're going to find what works for you, what doesn't. You and I were talking on the weekend how we both were really using tapping, and then we both kind of fell off of it because we were using other coping skills, and now we're both kind of like, we should go back and try
tapping again. Yeah,
like,
because
it wasn't. It just falls out of.
You stop using it. Yeah, we were talking about it because we were saying it would help the kids fall asleep better if they're having trouble falling asleep, and we're like, oh, we should bring that back. I think a good place to start is, first of all, we're all about awareness as a good first step. listener, you might be using coping skills that you don't realize you're using that might have detrimental effects. The coping skills we're talking about are, have long-term mental health benefits. But let me give you an example of a coping skill that many people have that is very common in our society, and that is shopping. And
Ooh.
the coping skills that are difficult to maintain are the ones that are really fast dopamine hits. So I'm just as guilty as anyone else as scrolling, shopping on Amazon, things like that. You get that quick dopamine release and it makes you feel better when you shop, when you buy something at the mall. It gives you a quick dopamine thrill. And that's why it's addicting. And that's why so many people do it. But so many quick, fast thrills often come with a crash. So that might be when you get your credit card bill in the mail. That might be, you might feel like you have to hide your purchases from your spouse. It might mean a whole number of things that then add negative types of feelings, although no feelings are positive or negative, but less preferred feelings like shame and guilt. And then you're perpetuating the bad feelings that you were trying to avoid to begin with. So what we're encouraging you is to sit back and think, when I have a bad day, how do I cope? What do I do? And is there something else that I can replace it with that might be healthier for me long-term to become the person I want to be?
I First of all, thank you for pointing those things out. I think they're very, very common. A good way that I think is a useful way to distinguish if it's a good coping skill or a bad coping skill is a good coping skill helps you in the long run. A bad coping skill either pushes it down or creates a new problem.
Yeah.
Like if I mean, online shopping is so much fun, right? Like it's like basically getting Santa to deliver something to your doorstep every other day if you want to do it that way. So there's this huge benefit for it, but it sets up other problems like, overspending, debt, budgeting troubles, all these kind of money things. So it feels good in the moment, but it feels bad after. Whereas something that is free, like going for a walk, humming, talking to a friend about it, those things will make you feel better in the long run and probably get you out of the loop, the trap, and you actually do cope with it rather than just push it off to the side and give yourself a little dopamine hit. And social media is extremely addictive because of that reason. Like it's designed to keep you on. So, how many times do you see people, they're just like scrolling mindlessly, and it is mindlessly because they're doing that. And it's not hating on the social media thing. It's just a really, really easy example to kind of look at and go, look, this doesn't actually serve you because you're not dealing with it. And
not only that, you're adding feelings of comparison, feelings of being less than, you're having FOMO, it's adding a lot of different things. And we're both on social media, so we get it.
Yeah. And it's a hard one to break too, especially when it makes you feel that dopamine is hard to break, even though social media makes most of us feel bad after the fact. And it's a real challenge for most of us to kind of go, okay, well, I'm not going to go on it because it gives you that initial hit, and then you go off and you get your notifications or whatever, and you come back on, you feel good, and then you feel bad. But it's just this weird kind of cycle that is not unlike, drinking and drugs. You feel good when you do it initially. You get your nicotine, your alcohol, your whatever substance, your brain fires off this great thing, and then you feel terrible later on. And long term, that doesn't help you grow to become the best version of yourself. And that's really what we're talking about right now, is that we want to become the best version of ourselves.
I think that's a good delineation too. Another good delineation is it's a coping skill that serves you if it helps you to feel better consistently and in the long run. Because another coping skill is crying. That release might feel bad, but then it might feel good. Your coping skills are supposed to make you feel better long term. Whereas the coping skills that might not be beneficial, they only make you feel better in the short term. And then you kind of have the crash.
Yeah, I'm going to Google what delineation means. I'm sure you don't want to play Scrabble with Catherine. She will obliterate you. And I had to use that word recently. Yeah, but you're 100% right. You know, it's that short-term pain for long-term gain
Mm-hmm.
instead of, short-term gain and long-term
Yeah,
pain.
that's right.
That was
Yeah, it
really
was.
hard to say, by the way. That
It could
shouldn't
be
have
put
been.
on a T-shirt. It was a good
That's
one.
not.
I just remember being so amazed. And I'm happy to share this with people today. This whole idea of coping skills, because it seems like we should just know this, much like so many other topics we talk about. But again, our society sometimes gets a little mixed up in the things that we value, and this is one of those things that I want to encourage people that you can learn. It's a skill you can acquire, and it's one that can be very helpful to you in the long term.
I love that. It really is an important adulting skill that really kind of gets beat out of us very, very early on with
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it was for you, but growing up for me, and it wasn't so much necessarily for my parents, though it was society around me that's saying like, well, suck it up and like let it go and all these things. And like those are about as effective as trying to solve algebra chewing bubble gum. It just, it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
you just start putting it away and then you just think like, well, now I'm miserable all the time. Well, what am I going to do? Am I going to start trying to cope, or I'm just going to avoid? And
Yeah.
it's easier to avoid. It's easier to crack a beer. It's easier to watch whatever makes you feel good in that moment, but it doesn't serve you in the long term. And if you're listening to us right now, it's because you want to get better in the long term. So give yourself permission to try something new. Something stuck out in that list that we gave you, or you probably thought, you know what, I should try this thing or that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have those moments, give yourself permission to try them. Google tapping, like just hum
Yeah.
to yourself in the car when that person cuts you off and you're like,
Yeah. Think
you get
about
upset. Yeah.
think about the things you loved to do as a child. Sometimes those
Oh,
are our
yes.
kind of very earliest things of enjoyment before we knew what the world approved of, or what was quote unquote good or bad, or what, you know, girls or boys quote unquote should do, shouldn't do, whatever. Think about what you really liked doing as a kid. And oftentimes that's where you can find your inspiration on the things that like sort of are innately you that you can get back to.
Yeah. Another one that happens for me is talking with people for sure about it, but helping somebody else is
Yes.
always, and that can also be a bad one because if I'm not dealing with
My own stuff. Yeah.
my own stuff, but there's a balance there. But yeah, helping other people with their something. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what. It just like it lifts me up and it makes me feel like, okay, I'm
A
doing
lot
good for the
better.
long term. So
I love that.
yeah.
Well, Andrew, what action step would you give our listeners as part of our way to sum up this coping skills episode? What would be the first step you'd encourage someone to take?
Well, I would replace the word grow up that you got told
Yeah.
when you were younger with get young, and
I like
you
that.
know and start, give yourself permission. You've just had a nice session of becoming aware that you might be
Mm-hmm.
doing this, and awareness is always our first step to growth. So now the next step is trying something out. Doesn't matter what it is, walking, what, like we've just been given a decent list to start that's not too overwhelming. Or think about what used to calm you when you were a kid. That's
Yeah.
always like you said, that's a big one. And then start to carve that new neural pathway that was there a long time ago, and start going back to it and start going, okay, this person did this. I had this happen. I am not going to go do the thing that I always do. I'm not going to go, shop on Amazon. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just the purpose that it's serving in that moment is the issue. And let yourself try this new thing. And it's not going to feel right in the first time, probably the way you want it to, because it's not going to have the fast dopamine hit that
Mm-hmm.
your brain gets in all these other situations. But start to assess, give yourself a week, a even a couple of days to kind of go, I handled this differently this time, and I'm not thinking about it 2 days later. In fact, if you don't forget to think about all of this 3 days later, because what you did worked, that's the success right there. Sure. And bring some consciousness to that. So that way you can start practicing the things that work and give yourself permission to fail. Big thing for us at 5-Year You is you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to grow. You have to be willing to fail, to have setbacks, to step higher. And that is a key thing.
I love that. Those are all great updates, great tips. I like it.
Well, thank you for bringing this idea to us today, because it's one of those things that you and I do, but we do forget it.
Yeah, we do forget that we had to learn it a few years ago ourselves, and it's super helpful, and it's helpful for the kids too. All right, we end every episode with something called glimmers. These are the sparkly, happy things that make our lives better, easier, books that we read, who knows. It's random every time, but we like to end with things that uplift us and things that we want to share with you. So Andrew, do you want to go first and share your glimmer?
Sure. I was visiting you last weekend, and I just got in really late last night. And my glimmer is I had three separate conversations with people, and they were all very deep. As I always joke that I'm incapable of like superficial conversation, but they're all deep conversations. And I left every one of them feeling like I had helped them. And in turn, that made me feel pretty awesome. And none of them, I didn't approach anybody. I'm usually, because I know I'm not
the energy. People.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, to the point where one guy, I sat next to him the whole plane ride. We didn't say a word. And then he offered me a lounge pass to, chat with him. And
so
I'm
cool.
like, it's really nice when you have like a 5-hour layover and you're like, come to the lounge. So just that's a glimmer. It's just, you forget sometimes that your energy is shifting and you have these things around you. So that's my glimmer. Catherine, what's yours?
My glimmer actually has to do with you visiting me this past weekend too, because it's super helpful to have a tech nerd as my partner, because you fixed my computer, man. You rock.
Thank you.
I am
the Andrew
so
Ego show.
I am so glimmery because this is my first time recording a podcast on my iMac. My iMac is like a couple years older than my laptop, and it just was going so slow. Like I wanted to fling it out the window every day, but it's so great because I am a freelance writer as my, regular day job. And it's just so nice to have the big screen, but it was like slow as a snail. Anyways, Andrew worked his magic, spent a few hours on it, made it all fast, and I don't know what he did, but I am so grateful because it's been so nice. So thank you. You are my glimmer.
Oh, thank you. That is really kind. And thank you for finding the articles for me to read on that. It's
I was like, I think this can fix it. I don't know how, but I think this is the thing. This sounds like my problem. Figure that out, right? Okay, thanks.
And for you tech people out there, I looked at this. I'm like, there is no reason why this should work the way it does, but it did. And it's really amazing. And I'm so grateful that it worked, because it's so nice to have the bigger screen. And the fact that you're recording on it for the first podcast on it for the first time shows that it's great.
It's working great. Thank you so much. Oh, and don't forget, if you want to get that advice from your future self, head on over to 5yearyou.com/future to get signed up.
We're rooting for you. Just a reminder, we're two people on the internet. We're not doctors or anything else, but we do want to help. If you feel that you need professional medical care, please see a licensed medical practitioner.